From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. I'm Shelby Varner. K-State grain economist Daniel O'Brien begins the show as he recaps this week's grain market and says what he expects to see in the WASDE report next week. Chip Redmond, K-State meteorologist, continues the show as he discusses muddy conditions, drought degradation, fire weather concerns, and more potential cold in the future. Ending the show is a Kansas wheat scoop from Gordon Clark as he reports on how Kansas delegation met with people from Mexico to reinforce the importance of the market. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Friday show with a grain market update from K-State grain economist Daniel O'Brien. Daniel, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Shelby.
Daniel, when we take a look at the futures, what are we seeing?
Well, we're seeing a response over the last several days. We've been seeing response to trade news, not a lot of changes in actual crop production conditions, although there are things that we're watching internationally in that, but movement with regard to the U.S. and China in both soybean exports of the United States to China, and also in terms of the pace of catching up shipments of U.S. grain sorghum to China as well. So we'll talk about that in a minute. And with that, we saw on Thursday soybean futures, the March contract, trade at about $11.10. Here a week ago, that was 50-some cents lower. So I think middle part of this week, we had a 20-cent plus day on the soybean futures moving to the higher side. And again, 20 cents here again on Thursday. So, and that was mainly based on a report, a social media report from the president indicating he had further discussions with the Chinese president with regard to U.S. Chinese purchases of soybeans. They've already bought 12 million metric tons. They've indicated that in that phone conversation, at least as the President Trump had indicated, they come in and buy another 8 million to get us up to 20. It's noteworthy that for 2027, 2028, that China's committed to buy about 25 million metric tons. And I think the reason they're coming in at a lower accumulated target so far in this year is they weren't active in the U.S. markets during the heart of our harvest. So they're playing catch up. So you got that happening. The other news that involves China has to do with the activity we've seen about the last 3 to 4 weeks in U.S. grain sorghum export sales, largely to China. So they had indicated the Chinese had indicated that they would buy just a hair under 200 million bushels of U.S. grain sorghum. So that's thought-provoking to look at. So I'll talk about the price impacts, and then eventually we're going to talk about the WASDE report coming up on Thursday and how these export numbers could play into how these balance sheets got, particularly again with the soybean numbers now, sorghum. We have a continuation. We have had here several weeks in a row strong U.S. corn exports, also not to China necessarily, but to Mexico and others. So got things happening there, and some up and down movement in the wheat market that we'll look at too, particularly involving hard red winter wheat. But so when you look at prices overall, after this export news has come into the market, you see we closed for corn kind of in sympathy to soybeans up to $4.35 and a quarter, 35 and a quarter cents on Thursday on the 5th. And that was up 5 cents. We're up a few cents a day prior to that. We're watching probably as close as more so than that right now with, or at least as much as we're getting ready to, now that we're into February, looking not too far again, not too far in the future. We'll be at least getting the planters ready to roll come April, or in our part of the world, April, May. But December corn, 461 and a quarter. It wasn't that long ago that with that. Then the last couple of weeks we're down to about 445, 450, something like that. So get that into play. And in looking at November soybeans as a comparison to corn, you had November soybeans at just under $11 at 10.97. Really, not a lot of change. Not as much change, perhaps, as for corn in new crop contracts. That was up 9 cents yesterday, though. I guess 9 3/4, almost 10. So we have farmers in the central and eastern corn belt and in the western corn belt making planting decisions between corn and soybeans. So we'll see how all this plays out. I think in the Western Corn Belt, of course, well, in Kansas in particular, we had sorghum into that discussion, and whether the winter wheat that we seeded, we'll take a look at that. And there's always the option if stands aren't good that we can bring in that we can make changes on those acres too. So we got those types of things occurring. The wheat market. Also, it's shown some improvement in the last couple days. It's been an up and down situation. March closed at $5.38, up 7 3/4 yesterday. The July contract, 563 3/4. September, our July forward contracts. So always a question to me: I'm thinking most elevators will probably, if they're forward contracting for July delivery and are going to go more than just a few days into July, they're probably looking at the September contract, just so that they don't find themselves in July in the middle of a delivery situation. But the September contract, 578 3/4, almost 580. That also up 6 3/4, 7 cents, just like July. So have those things going on. The new crop forward contract bids for us here. We've been talking futures for corn. We've seen again the continuation of strong exports, pretty strong usage in other on the ethanol side. Just on a side note, within the last week, we've had some real up and down, spiking higher and lower at actual ethanol production on a weekly basis being reported. So it's worth looking at as to. It doesn't look like that we've changed the middle of that range that much, but we really had some spikes up and down here of late. So it's something worth watching. But just in the corn market, again, the strongest cash bid, $4.25 in Pittsburgh. New crop bid, 441. Something that's been a bit different that I could see from at least previous few weeks is suddenly this. We have some higher market bids at one or two major elevators in the Salina area. Actually, second highest bid in the state. It's not all the elevators, but one or two lead ones, up to $4.16, and that's at least with what you see listed. That was the price both for the cash bid and the new crop forward contract bid. Southwest Kansas traditional cash price leader, 410. So here you got you have the cash bid at Garden City at 410, following Salina at 416, following Pittsburgh at 425. Kind of a sea change, something different in our part of the area. And just quickly, you do see a uniform higher bid for grain sorghum for new crop prices. Actually, the highest bid. It's one or two standard elevators, 386 for grain sorghum for fall 2026. So we'll see where that goes. Strong bid in Hutchinson for new crop bid for soybeans at 1063. The next highest bid's 1029 and in Salina and Topeka. So it's always interesting. We have one or two bids really standing out. And then for wheat, again, we see that the highest bids are pretty uniform for harvest. Highest bid in Salina, Topeka, and Hutchinson, all at 539. So it's interesting to watch. I would say we do have that USDA WASDE report coming out on Tuesday morning. And some of these issues that we've been talking about, particularly with regard to exports, would be the key things to look for. I'm thinking with regard to what changes might come out of that report. Really, we're late enough now that we're not anticipating any late enough in that we're past the January crop production report. I'd be extremely surprised if we had any change at all on the production side. You could see some import numbers moving around, old crop ending stocks that could shift around coming into new crop bids. But I guess I would wonder when I look at that report is the corn export figure going to stay at 3.2 billion bushels? Again, about 400 to 500 million higher than we've ever had, or does it moderate some? I'd be watching for that on Tuesday morning. I'd also be watching for the grain sorghum export number, 225 million. Are we holding out, having strong confidence that we're going to stay there? And maybe the biggest issue now would be in the soybean supply demand balance sheet. Again, we dropped down to 1.575 billion bushels as the projected soybean number, but now China's come to the table and they've made promises, commitments, quasi commitments, verbal, but still they said they would, that they would be coming back into the U.S. soybean market in a stronger way. Do we see a 25 to 50 million bushel increase in up to again 1.6 billion, 625 million bushels, or 1.65 billion? I guess bushel for bushel, to the degree that exports move higher for soybeans, will crunch down the ending stocks figures a bit and see where we go. In fact, the expectations for the trade estimates for U.S. ending stocks generally, well, I think they're up in the air. We could look into the details of that, but I think we could put down that probably not expecting a lot of change, except perhaps primarily in that soybean number. We'll see if these political announcements, geopolitical impacts, come into play and affect that. If we raise soybean export, improve usage, it's very likely we could tighten up stocks and have some better price improvement. Again, in the last few days, we've seen a 50-cent increase in soybean futures. Do we see any increase in soybean projected season average prices because of some of these recent moves? We shall see.
Daniel, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby. Take care.
That was K-State grain economist Daniel O'Brien. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show with a weather update from K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Chip, where I'm at, a lot of the snow has melted, and is that the case for most of the state?
Yeah, we've continued to see warmer temperatures, and they started out in the west really about a week ago, and that's helped eradicate the snow in the far west. And then as we kind of progressed through the week, the warmer temperatures just kept pushing east and pushing east and pushing east, and they were really only pushing eastward where there was no snow cover. And they would get checked up by this eastward progression, be checked up by the snow, because the snow helped to really keep things cooler. And we've pretty much gotten rid of all the widespread snowpack in the state. And so now we're starting to see temperatures start to adjust and warm up. That ground's able to warm up enough, and then warms the air above it. And we get kind of that positive feedback of more warmth as a result. There's still snow out there. I know a lot of the areas, especially in eastern Kansas, that have wooded areas are holding snow, especially the northern aspects, the sides of the hill that face the north. They're going to hold that snow a lot longer because that ground's still plenty cold there and it's shaded. And so where we have shade, we're able to keep that snow. And other areas, widespread open fields, snow melted pretty quick. I know an observation a lot of folks made that they thought was interesting is that fields that were bare or had no grass or anything sticking up held that moisture or held that snow longer than areas that did have grass, because, well, that grass sticks up. It actually absorbs that solar radiation, helps melt off the snow across that field quicker. Whereas you have a continuous area of snow cover and there's nothing sticking up disrupting it, it takes longer for that snow to melt because it reflects a lot more of that solar radiation. It's not necessarily reflective of the soil temperatures. Soil temperatures across the state have been pretty uniform. They're still in the 30s, around that freezing mark. And since they've gotten fairly moist with this recent snow, it's going to take a lot of energy to both warm it up and cool it off. So for the most part, snow cover has been eradicated by the warmer temperatures and the increase in solar radiation.
And with our mixture of melting snow and warmer temperatures, does that mean we're dealing with quite a bit of mud?
Yeah, there's a lot of mud out there. Where we had the most recent snow, So mostly just central eastern Kansas and some isolated parts of southwest Kansas. But while the soils weren't completely frozen, that moisture didn't really soak in very far. And I'm going to guess there's a little artifact of we had a cold period about a week before the bigger, more widespread snow occurred in the middle of January. I think there might be just a subtle thin layer of frozen soils that's subsurface that's helping not allow that moisture to penetrate downward. And as a result, we get kind of the pooling of that little bit of moisture. It's only about 3 to 5 tenths of moisture, depending on where the heaviest snows were. And less, obviously, if you saw less than 6 inches of snow or so. And so we got that pooling of moisture that's resulting in mud. I know that's not good for folks calving, and definitely makes things much more challenging driving around. Hopefully, with the influx of warmer temperatures, we can start to thaw out that layer. Again, it's going to take more energy just because of the amount of moisture that's in that surface layer of soil. But hopefully, we can get that moisture going downward and dry things out at the surface.
As we have seen a little bit of moisture in Kansas, does that show that our drought monitor is seeing degradation or improvement?
Yeah, so the corridor of the greatest moisture over the last 30 days kind of stretched from southwest Kansas into north central and northeast Kansas. Northwest, south central, southeast, both missed out on a lot of that moisture. And as a result, they're running anywhere from 3/4 of an inch deficit just in the last 30 days in the southeast. That's not a huge deal because that's about half of average. So they average about 1.4 inches. And getting in the northwest, they're about 3 to 4 tenths of an inch below average for the 30-day period. That's almost 100% of average. They're very, very dry. And as a result of the dryness in the northwest, drought expanded in that region. We saw an introduction of moderate drought in Cheyenne County. And then south along the border of Oklahoma, we're also seeing expansion of abnormally dry northward from Oklahoma into southern Kansas. Kansas has kind of been on its own little island of pretty much drought-free conditions except for the far east. And slowly but surely, that island is starting to shrink as drought's starting to slowly expand it basically in from all directions into Kansas. We've had moisture. It's not super, super dry. It's just we're starting to accumulate longer-term deficits, especially when you consider some of the areas in the east that were part of that flash drought at the end of the growing season last year. They're looking at 3, 4, 5 inches of precipitation deficits. And southern Kansas, not quite as much, about 2 inches, in northwest, about 1.5 inches. So we've got longer term deficits, and that's the reason drought is starting to expand.
And with the drought expansion, any concerns when we look into our forecast?
Yeah, so obviously with the snow gone, temperatures are going to be much warmer, and we're talking as much as 20, maybe even 25 degrees above normal. Highs across the state vary by location, but for the most part are in the low to mid 40s. That's your normal highs, and our normal lows are in the low teens to around 20 degrees. We're going to be approaching 70 degrees early next week, just warm conditions. And we're also going to see an increase in wind. As you get warmer, we're able to lift that air higher, and we bring more wind down to the surface. Not a significant wind, but I'd say Kansas level of wind with averages in the afternoons of 20, 25, maybe 30 miles an hour each day. And the air mass is going to be overall pretty dry. This is a ridge of high pressure that's been situated over the western part of the United States. It's shifting east into central Kansas over the course of the next couple of days, and that's going to bring the warmest, driest conditions. And then as we go into early next week or middle of next week, we'll see an influx of moisture. We might see some shower activity, maybe rain or snow, and a brief temporary cool down before temperatures rebound again into warmth again and prevail in dry conditions, I think, for most of the state. So we've definitely entered a complete pattern change. That northwest flow that's brought that cold Arctic air southwards shifted off to the east. But we'll watch to our west as we start, as that ridge of high pressure moved into central United States, it's being replaced by another trough or another storm system in the far west. And we'll watch that and see if it can truly progress eastward or if it gets disrupted by that high pressure. So there's definitely a lot of uncertainty as we move towards the end of February. just as we get a final stretch of the polar vortex before it falls apart in the spring. There's some hints of maybe some colder air that's going to try to push into early March. But overall, above normal temperatures and drier than normal conditions look to be the rule.
Do you have some fire concerns as we look at our weather moving forward in February?
Yeah, first off, a lot of folks have gotten the pile burning in with this snow cover. That's great. And they just need to go out and start rechecking them. As we lost the snow cover, those piles are still going to hold heat. Stir it up, make sure they're cold to the touch of the hand. And grass loading is still exceptional across the whole state for the most part. From last year's growing season, we haven't been able to mat that snow down. We really haven't had a lot of wet, heavy snow. It's been more of that dry, powdery that's just not effective at smushing down that grass. And so we have a landscape that is prepared to carry fire, and it'll carry fire a lot quicker than many folks will think. That grass is a 1 hour fuel. It takes an hour to dry out. That's it, an hour, no matter how much moisture we've seen. And so as you see these drier, warmer temperatures over the coming week, the opportunity for those brush piles to flare back up and start spreading are pretty high. And the new fire starts too. Maybe people putting prescribed fire down on the ground early, trying to get ahead of the curve. Just anticipates, increased fire behavior than what you'd expect, I think, with the grass loading we have out there. And as you look bigger picture, February, March are both highlighted for the entire state of Kansas to be above normal for significant fire potential at the national level. So a lot of concern just for more active fire activity because of the fuel loading and because of the overall pattern transition from a La Nina maybe towards an El Nino by the end of the spring or early summer. That's really conducive for an increase in fire activities across the region. So let's be fire smart and let's avoid sparking and setting fires if we don't have a good plan in place.
And if something does happen, a good reminder to call their fire department?
Yeah. That's been talking to a lot of fire departments. That's been the headline this year is this: we've got a lot of grass out there. Expect fires to be harder to suppress. Expect fire behavior to be increased compared to previous years just because of the grass loading. And that's not even considering the weather conditions that might also align. So a lot of extra preparedness going on behind the scenes to hopefully be able to challenge and take on this upcoming fire season.
Chip, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Yep, thanks for having me.
That was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Just as a reminder, a great way to check up on Kansas fire weather is by going to the Mesonet website. That website URL is Mesonet.k.su.edu. I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and to conclude today's show, we have a wheat scoop from Kansas Wheat. And on this segment, they discuss how U.S. Wheat Associates staff in Mexico City met with Kansas delegation led by Senator Roger Marshall in January.
U.S. Wheat Associates staff in Mexico City discussed the importance of the Mexican market to U.S. wheat farmers in mid-January with a visiting delegation of Kansas commodity groups led by U.S. Senator Roger Marshall. The symbiotic relationship between U.S. wheat farmers and Mexican millers relies on the U.S. as a reliable supplier of high-quality wheat to the Mexican private milling sector, said Mitch Stolicki, U.S. Wheat Regional Vice President. We appreciate the Senator traveling to Mexico to learn more about our work in this top market and offer his support for expanding this successful partnership. Senator Marshall traveled with leaders from Kansas Wheat, Kansas Soybean, Kansas Sorghum, Kansas Corn, Kansas Dairy, and the Kansas Grain and Feed Association. While in Mexico, Senator Marshall met with high-level Mexican government officials, including the Mexican Secretary of Agriculture, to discuss the importance of trade between the two countries, the shared role Kansas agriculture plays in feeding families across North America. The delegation also met with private sector businesses and associations operating in both Mexico and the U.S. to learn more about the economic and logistical partnerships powering trade between the two nations. The delegation also met with Stolicki and Stephanie Bryant Erdman, U.S. Wheat Assistant Regional Director, on Friday, January 16th, The meeting covered a wide array of topics ranging from the different wheat classes purchased by Mexico from the United States, the volume of Mexican wheat imports, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, and transportation economics related to the shipping of wheat by rail from U.S. to Mexico. The U.S. wheat team also presented an overview of the Mexican market situation, specific trade data on wheat shipments from Kansas to Mexico, and future opportunities to expand U.S.-Mexico wheat trade. As of January 8, 2026, Mexico has purchased 3.39 million metric tons of U.S. wheat, a 6% increase from last marketing year. Mexico currently ranks as the top buyer of U.S. hard red winter and soft red winter wheat, and the second largest buyer of hard spring wheat and durum. Clay Shim, a Kansas wheat farmer from Sharon Springs, participated in the trade mission as a representative of Kansas wheat. He noted that the pride and professionalism in the Mexican milling industry, their appreciation for the quality of wheat produced in the United States, and their desire to move more trains and trucks across the border even more efficiently to keep up with the country's growing demand for wheat. He remarked that it was refreshing to see the same salt-of-the-earth work ethic valued by U.S. farming communities mirrored in customers south of the border. My personal takeaway is that the Mexican people are a group I am proud to have as partners on the world stage, Shim said. There is a kinship there, a friendliness, and a desire to connect that makes it feel like true North American culture. They are all in on this partnership, and we should be too. For Kansas Wheat, this is Gordon Clark.
Once again, that was Kansas Wheat's Wheat Scoop. If you'd like to check out more from Kansas Wheat, you can do so by going to their website, kswheat.com. As we round out this week's shows of Agriculture Today, I would like to let you know about the Winter Wednesday webinar series that the Department of Agricultural Economics is doing here at Kansas State University. These webinars are free, however, registration is required, and they will be taking place over the lunch hour. The first one is on February 11th, discussing crop profitability and managing expenses with Daniel O'Brien and Greg Eibendahl. The next one on February 18th is about farm safety nets and crop insurance and government programs with Jenny Ift and Robin Reed. Then on February 25th, you have Kansas land values with Megan Hughes and Is It Time to Retire? What About the Next Generation with Ashley Westerhold. On March 4th, you can have an overview of the farm financial situation as well as tariffs and trade with Alan Featherstone. And then it all wraps up on March 11th with a cattle outlook from Glenn Tonser. If you'd like to find out more information about this Winter Wednesday webinar series, you can find it by going to AgManager.info, or I will also link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. That's all we have for you this week on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you on Monday.